Millionaire marries an obese woman as a bet, and she turns the entire city against him overnight. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The wedding hall glowed with golden chandeliers, cameras flashing like 1,000 lightning bolts. Guests whispered into champagne glasses, rumors rolling through the crowd like wildfire. They all knew this wasn't love. This was a bet, a cruel joke turned into a spectacle. And at the center of it, a billionaire groom stood stiff in his tailored black tuxedo, his smile sharp, rehearsed, hollow. Beside him walked the bride, a woman in white satin, fuller-bodied than the glittering models around her. Her veil trembled with every step, not from fear, but from the weight of every eye drilling into her. Some guests smirked, others laughed behind jeweled hands. One whispered too loud, "He really went through with it, married her just to win a dare." The billionaire didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. To him, she was still just the punchline of a bet he had sworn to win in front of his friends. But she raised her chin, meeting the sea of judgment with steady eyes. Her heels clicked across the marble aisle, each step echoing louder than the orchestra's strings. When the vows ended, applause was scattered, almost mocking. Reporters shoved microphones forward, demanding answers. One bold voice cut through. "Mr. Carter, is it true you married her because of a bet?" The crowd held its breath. The groom's jaw tightened, a faint smirk pulling at the corner of his lips. He didn't deny it, and in that silence, the humiliation was supposed to crush her. Instead, she reached for the microphone. Her voice was calm, even amused. "If a man has to marry me as a bet," she said, "then maybe I should thank him. Because for once, every person in this city is finally forced to look at someone like me." The ballroom froze. Forks paused in midair, glasses stopped clinking. Even the billionaire turned to her, truly looking at her for the first time. "I don't mind being the wager," she continued, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "What I do mind is how quickly you all laugh, as if my worth begins and ends with my body. If that's the game, then I assure you I intend to change the rules." A hush spread, heavy and uncomfortable. For the first time all night, the laughter died. Cameras clicked faster, desperate to capture the moment. Somewhere in the back, a guest muttered, "She's not supposed to fight back." The groom leaned closer, whispering harshly, "What are you doing?" She smiled without turning her head. "Winning." By the time the reception began, her words were already flooding social media. Number Team Bride started trending, voices rising in her defense. Strangers called her brave. Some called her an inspiration. What was meant to humiliate her was turning into something else entirely. The billionaire, who had walked into this night thinking he owned the room, now found the spotlight slipping. His friends exchanged nervous glances. His family whispered about reputations and shareholders. And the woman he thought would cower beside him was rewriting the story in real time. He raised his glass, forcing a grin for the cameras. But deep inside, unease gnawed at him, because for the first time, the city wasn't laughing with him. It was laughing at him and cheering for her. And that was only the beginning. The night after the wedding, the city wouldn't sleep. Headlines screamed across every platform, "Billionaire marries plus, size woman in shocking bet scandal." Photos of her speech spread like wildfire. Some mocked, but many more applauded. Her face, once anonymous, was now on every phone screen, every television channel, every whispered conversation at a late-night diner. Inside his penthouse, the billionaire stared out over the glittering skyline. His phone buzzed, non-stop board members demanding explanations, sponsors threatening to pull out, friends sending panic texts. He loosened his tie, but the pressure only grew tighter. His bet had been a victory for one night, but already it was unraveling. She sat across the room, still in her wedding dress, her makeup faded but her eyes unshaken. She had removed the veil, letting her curls fall freely, refusing to look diminished. She didn't say a word at first, sipping water like she owned the silence. Finally, he snapped, "You humiliated me." She glanced up, calm. "Number, I saved myself. You were the one who humiliated me." I just turned the spotlight back where it belonged. His fists clenched. He wasn't used to this. Not from business rivals, and certainly not from a wife he never intended to respect. "You think one speech changes anything?" Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "I don't think. I know. Look outside. The city is already choosing sides." He looked back at the window, where billboards still showed his grinning face from old ad campaigns. Now, those same screens were being hijacked by hashtags, by images of her standing tall in her gown. The world was shifting, and he hated how powerless it made him feel. Morning came, but the chaos didn't die. Reporters gathered outside the mansion gates. Paparazzi shouted questions. "Do you regret marrying her? Was it really a bet? Will you divorce her?" He stormed past them, sunglasses on, jaw tight, refusing to answer. She, however, stopped at the gate. She looked directly at the cameras, her voice steady. "You all want to know if I regret marrying him? Number. I regret that the world thinks a woman's worth is a joke. But as for me, I'm not going anywhere." The crowd erupted, half gasps, half cheers. And once again, the narrative tilted in her favor. Later that afternoon, at a family brunch forced by his mother, the tension crackled like static. Crystal glasses clinked, but no one smiled. His mother leaned forward, icy eyes fixed on the bride. "You've embarrassed this family. This stunt of yours will ruin us." The bride calmly cut into her toast. "Funny. I thought ruining the family name happened when your son turned marriage into a party game." A sharp inhale circled the table. His cousins looked down at their plates. Even his father shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to yell, to silence her, but the weight of his family's stares pinned him in place. When they left the table, he grabbed her wrist. "Stop talking like that." She pulled free, standing tall. "If you want me silent, divorce me. But as long as I wear this ring, I'll speak, and people will listen." That night, the internet exploded again. Clips of her standing up to the billionaire's mother went viral. Comments flooded in, "She's fearless." Finally, someone who speaks the truth. Every insult thrown at her became fuel. Every sneer turned into another spotlight. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized the power he thought he controlled was slipping out of his hands. And it was slipping straight into hers. But as he lay awake in the dark, he couldn't shake one thought. Was he losing, or was he beginning to feel something he never expected? Something dangerously close to admiration. The city had chosen its side, and it wasn't his, not anymore. The third day of marriage began not with peace, but with another storm. News vans lined the street outside the mansion, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like weapons. The city wasn't just watching anymore, it was waiting. Inside, the billionaire paced across the polished marble floor, phone glued to his ear. "No, I don't need PR spin, I need control," he barked at his advisor. "Shut the story down. Pay whoever you have to." From the kitchen doorway, she leaned against the frame, still in a simple robe, her hair pulled back. She watched him unravel, unbothered. "You can't buy silence forever," she said softly. He glared. "You don't understand how this world works." She took a step forward, calm and steady. "Oh, I understand perfectly. Your entire world runs on fear, fear of losing status, fear of being mocked. Mine doesn't. I lost all that years ago. That's why I can't be broken." Her words landed like a stone in still water. He wanted to dismiss her, to laugh, but something about her quiet defiance cut deeper than any headline. Later that morning, his assistant rushed in, face pale. "Sir, the investors canceled tomorrow's meeting. They're reconsidering contracts. They don't want to be tied to this scandal." The billionaire slammed a fist onto the desk. Papers scattered. His empire, built over decades, was slipping in days all because of her. Or so he told himself. But then she walked past, holding a tray of coffee mugs for the household staff. She didn't act like the cause of chaos. She acted like someone who still had dignity, even in the eye of the storm. And the staff, people who had always feared his presence, now looked at her with respect. That night, the couple was invited, or rather summoned, to a charity gala. The family insisted they attend, hoping to salvage some reputation. He prepared like a warrior going to battle. Perfect suit, perfect tie, mask of arrogance. She prepared differently. She wore a navy dress, elegant but unpretentious, hair in loose curls. When she walked down the stairs, every servant stopped to look. At the gala, whispers swirled before they even reached the ballroom. Cameras flashed, but this time the focus wasn't on him, it was on her. A guest murmured, "That's the bride. She doesn't look ashamed at all." Another said, "She carries herself better than half the women here." Midway through dinner, a wealthy socialite leaned across the table with a cruel smile. "So tell us, dear, how does it feel knowing you were only chosen because of a bet?" The table chuckled, waiting for her to shrink, but she didn't. She placed her fork down gently, looked the woman straight in the eye, and replied, "It feels like I'm sitting at this table while you still need to whisper to be heard." The laughter died instantly. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the billionaire blinked, stunned, and then applause. Not from everyone, but enough to matter. A few guests clapped, others nodded. For the first time, she wasn't just defending herself, she was winning people over. The billionaire leaned close, whispering sharply, "You're playing with fire." She tilted her head, eyes glinting. "Number, I'm learning how to burn." When the gala ended, reporters swarmed outside. They didn't ask him questions, they asked her, "What message do you have for women who feel judged by their bodies? Do you see yourself as a role model now?" She answered with poise, each word striking like a hammer. "I'm not a role model. I'm just tired of pretending shame belongs to me. Let those who laugh carry it instead." The headlines the next morning said it all. "The bride who stole the spotlight." And for the first time, as he read the papers in silence, the billionaire realized the city wasn't just against him. It was beginning to belong to her. By the fourth morning, the billionaire's penthouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Newspapers littered the marble counter, each headline a dagger. The bet that backfired. Bride becomes voice for the voiceless. His name, once synonymous with power, was now dripping with mockery. He sat in silence, coffee untouched, scrolling through social media. Every clip of her speech at the gala had gone viral. Millions of views, comments flooding in. People didn't just admire her, they adored her. Strangers called her brave, strong, beautiful. And for the first time, he realized the city wasn't laughing at her anymore. It was laughing at him. She entered the kitchen, dressed simply, carrying a notebook. Her calm presence was like a mirror, reflecting his chaos. "You should eat," she said quietly. "I don't need advice from you," he muttered, not looking up. She poured herself tea, unbothered. "It's not advice, just common sense. You can't fight a storm on an empty stomach." The words were ordinary, but they cut. She was living as if she hadn't just been mocked on every channel. Meanwhile, he, the billionaire with everything, couldn't even lift his fork. Later that day, his board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. He insisted she stay home, but she followed anyway, walking into the glass tower lobby with steady steps. The employees whispered, their eyes shifting between him and her. They had expected shame. Instead, she carried dignity like armor. Inside the boardroom, the air was thick. One executive leaned forward, voice sharp. "Your personal decisions are damaging the company. We can't lose investors over a reckless bet." The billionaire opened his mouth, but before he could speak, she stood. Every eye turned. She wasn't supposed to be there, let alone speak. "You're right," she said, voice clear. "A bet is reckless, but you're blaming the wrong person. I didn't make it." He did. Her hand brushed lightly against her wedding ring, then dropped to her side. "And yet, you're not losing because of me. You're losing because people are finally seeing through him." Gasps filled the room. The billionaire's jaw locked. He should have silenced her. He should have thrown her out. But something inside him froze, because for the first time, her words didn't sound like betrayal. They sounded like truth. The meeting ended in chaos, half the board furious, half uncertain. Outside the tower, reporters swarmed again. And once more, they asked her, not him. That evening, back in the penthouse, he confronted her. His voice cracked between anger and confusion. "Why do you keep doing this? Every time you speak, you strip me of more power." She looked at him, unflinching. I strip away your mask. The difference is up to you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city outside hummed with traffic and lights, but inside the silence felt heavier than stone. Later, as she sat by the window journaling, he caught himself watching her. Not with mockery, not with contempt, but with something dangerously close to respect. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, somehow, she was becoming the only person who did. When midnight came, he still hadn't closed his eyes. One thought pulsed in his mind, louder than the headlines, louder than the whispers of betrayal. Maybe the bet was already over. Because without realizing it, he was the one losing, and she was the one winning. By the fifth day, the mansion was no longer quiet. Protesters gathered at the gates, holding signs not against her, but against him. "Respect women. Marriage is not a joke." The chants echoed through the iron bars, each one a reminder of how quickly public opinion had shifted. He watched from the balcony, phone buzzing endlessly with missed calls. His empire was trembling. Sponsors paused deals, investors pulled out. What once took him a lifetime to build was collapsing in a week. And the woman who was supposed to be a temporary pawn was now the reason every headline read like a verdict. Downstairs, she was in the living room, sitting calmly with a local journalist. She wore a simple blouse, hair tied back, no jewelry, no attempt to look glamorous. Yet the camera loved her. Her words carried weight. "I never asked for attention," she said softly. "But if my marriage became a bet, then I want that humiliation to mean something. I want people to remember. No woman should be measured by her size, her shape, or someone else's ego." The journalist nodded, hanging on every word. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. She was no longer just his wife. She was becoming a movement. That night, he confronted her. "Do you enjoy this? Making me the villain?" She closed her notebook and looked him in the eye. "I don't need to make you the villain. You did that yourself. But if you really want to change the story, you still can. The question is, do you want to?" Her calmness disarmed him more than anger ever could. He had crushed CEOs in boardrooms, humiliated rivals in negotiations, but he couldn't win against her silence, her dignity, her truth. The following evening, they attended another public event, a fundraising dinner hosted by the mayor. Cameras followed their every move. The billionaire entered with his usual icy confidence, but the crowd's attention snapped toward her. Murmurs rose. People weren't laughing anymore. They were admiring. Midway through the night, an investor's wife approached with a fake smile. "My dear, it must be hard, standing next to him, knowing the whole city thinks this is a sham." The billionaire tensed, ready to cut the woman down. But his wife smiled calmly. "Sham or not, I'm still here. And unlike most, I don't hide behind champagne glasses when I speak." The jab was clean, elegant, undeniable. The room shifted. A few laughed not at her, but with her. For the first time, he felt the room slip completely out of his grasp. She wasn't just surviving, she was commanding. Later, in the car, silence hung heavy. Streetlights flashed across their faces as they drove back. "Finally," he said, almost against his own pride, "you're changing everything." She turned to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "I'm just refusing to be what you thought I was. That's what changes things." He had no reply. For years, his words had ended every conversation. But with her, silence spoke louder. When they arrived home, the chants from protesters still echoed outside. He walked past them quickly, head down. She, however, paused at the gate, lifted her chin, and waved. The crowd roared with approval. He watched from the steps, a knot twisting inside him. This was supposed to be his game, his win, his city. But night after night, headline after headline, the truth became clearer. The city wasn't his anymore. It was hers. And maybe, just maybe, so was his heart. By the sixth day, the weight of scandal pressed harder than ever. The billionaire's office, once a fortress of order, now buzzed with chaos. Assistants rushed in and out, phones rang endlessly, and every screen glowed with breaking news. The bride speaks, city listens. His empire wasn't just shaking, it was crumbling. He stood at the head of the long glass table, flanked by lawyers and executives. Charts showed plummeting stocks, contracts frozen, endorsements gone. One board member slammed a folder shut. "You're bleeding out in the press. This woman, your wife, is destroying everything." His jaw tightened. "She's not destroying it. She's revealing it." The words slipped out before he realized. The room stared. He masked it quickly, but the truth lingered inside him like a thorn. Across town, she sat in a small cafe with her younger sister. No cameras, no lights, just a quiet moment over warm mugs. Her sister, wide-eyed, whispered, "You don't seem scared. Aren't you afraid of what they'll do to you?" She smiled softly. "Fear is what kept me silent all my life. If I stop now, then the bet really wins." But she wasn't as calm as she looked. When her sister left, she sat alone, staring at the steam rising from her coffee. For the first time in days, she let her shoulders slump, the exhaustion showing. Still, she whispered to herself, "I have to keep standing. For me. For every woman watching." That night, the couple attended a charity art auction. It wasn't optional, their presence was demanded to keep at least one sponsor alive. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, but the atmosphere was tense. Reporters lined the walls, waiting for a slip, a headline. As the bidding began, whispers grew. "That's her, the bet bride. No shame at all." Yet when she walked in, she carried herself like royalty, back straight, smile poised, eyes unafraid. Cameras flashed, and for the first time, the flashes weren't mocking. They were admiring. Midway through the evening, a painting was unveiled, an abstract piece meant to symbolize resilience. The auctioneer raised his voice, calling for bids. Silence stretched too long, until she calmly lifted her paddle. Gasps rippled across the room. The billionaire stiffened. He hadn't told her to bid. He leaned in, whispering sharply, "Do you even know what you're doing?" She whispered back, eyes locked on the painting. "Yes, I'm claiming my place in this room." Her boldness caught attention. Another bidder joined, then another. The price soared. All eyes turned to her. The final hammer fell sold, to the bride of the man who had married her as a bet. Applause broke out, genuine, reluctant, but undeniable. After the event, in the car, silence wrapped around them again. He finally asked, voice low, "Why did you do that?" She turned toward him, expression calm but steady. "Because every woman in that room was waiting to see if I'd break, and I refuse." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman he thought would be his humiliation was becoming his shield, his fire, his mirror. Something he had never felt before stirred in him, a mix of guilt, respect, and something dangerously close to longing. Back at the mansion, he poured a drink, staring at the amber liquid as though it held answers. "You're winning them over," he muttered. She set her notebook on the table, eyes locking with his. "I'm not trying to win them. I'm trying to win myself." And for the first time, he didn't have a reply, because deep inside, he knew she already had. The city wasn't just watching her anymore. It was following her. And he was, too. By the seventh day, the mansion no longer felt like his. Every corner whispered her presence. The staff who once scurried in fear of his voice now greeted her first, offering smiles, small bows of respect. He noticed it all, though he said nothing. For the first time in years, he wasn't the center of his own home. The morning paper screamed another headline. From bet to belief, bride captures hearts of a city. He crumpled it in his hands, yet he couldn't deny the truth staring back at him. She walked into the study, holding a mug of coffee. No makeup, just natural light on her face. She placed the mug on the desk. "You didn't sleep again." He didn't answer. He stared at her instead, his mind replaying the auction from the night before. How she had lifted her paddle with more confidence than half the billionaires in that room. How the applause had been hers, not his. "Finally," he said, almost begrudgingly, "you're turning them against me." Her gaze didn't falter. "Number, you did that yourself. I'm just not letting them turn me into a victim." Her words stung, but not because they were cruel, because they were true. That afternoon, he received a call from his oldest friend, the very man who had dared him into the marriage. "It's over," the voice sneered. "You look pathetic. She's making a fool out of you. Divorce her before you lose everything." He slammed the phone down, chest tight. For years, he had lived off respect, off fear, off control. Now, even his friends smelled weakness. And yet, when he thought of divorcing her, something inside him rebelled. That evening, they attended a press event, a launch for a charity hospital wing. Reporters crowded the red carpet, flashes firing like lightning. The billionaire straightened his shoulders, mask of arrogance intact. But the moment she stepped out of the car in a simple black gown, the crowd roared. "Over here! Smile, ma'am. Oh, can we get a quote from you?" The billionaire's jaw tightened as microphones swung toward her instead of him. She paused, giving the cameras a serene smile. "I don't need to be anyone's symbol. I just want to remind people, respect is free. So why do we give it so sparingly?" The words hit like a spark in dry grass. Applause broke out. Even the reporters, usually vultures, clapped. Inside, as speeches began, the billionaire tried to focus. But every eye in the room wasn't on him. It was on her. When the mayor toasted to "the woman who reminded us that dignity can't be bought," the billionaire's chest tightened. He forced a smile, but deep down, a storm raged. Back in the car, silence again. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "They love you." She looked out the window, city lights reflecting in her eyes. "Number, they just finally see me." He studied her profile, the calm strength in her expression, and for the first time, he wondered not how to silence her, not how to outshine her, but how to deserve her. Later that night, unable to sleep, he found himself scrolling through clips of her speeches, her interviews, her candid moments with strangers. Each time, she carried herself with grace, even when mocked. Each time, she made people stop and listen. He shut off the phone, sat in darkness, and whispered to himself, "What have I done?" Because slowly, painfully, undeniably, his heart was no longer his own. It was hers, and she didn't even know it yet. By the 8th day, the cracks in his empire were visible to everyone. Stock tickers scrolled red, shareholders threatened revolt, and his once loyal friends vanished like smoke. But while his world shook, hers only grew stronger. That morning, she was invited to speak on a popular daytime talk show. The invitation hadn't been for him, it had been for her alone. When the producers called, he expected her to decline. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "Tell them I'll be there." He drove her to the studio himself, jaw tight the entire ride. "Do you even realize what you're stepping into?" he asked. She turned her head toward the window, city streets flashing by. "Yes. And I'm not stepping in for you, I'm stepping in for every woman who's ever been laughed at." Inside the studio, the audience buzzed with anticipation. Cameras rolled, lights burned bright. When she walked onto the stage, applause erupted like thunder. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't a politician. She was simply herself. Yet the people cheered, as if she carried their voices. The host leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. "People say your husband married you as part of a bet. How do you feel about that?" The crowd hushed. She folded her hands, steady. "If that's true, then the joke was supposed to be on me. But look around. Who's really laughing now?" The audience gasped, then clapped wildly. She continued, "I didn't marry to be loved by strangers. But if this marriage made the world see that respect belongs to everyone, then maybe that's the first bet I'm proud to win." Backstage, he stood frozen, watching her on the monitor. Every word pierced through his armor. She wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was teaching him, the billionaire who thought he knew everything about power, what true power looked like. When the show ended, they stepped outside to find a sea of fans waiting. Some carried signs with her name. Others reached out for handshakes, photos, words of encouragement. Reporters shouted, but this time, the questions weren't sharp knives. They were curious, respectful, even admiring. In the car, silence hung heavy. Finally, he broke it. "You're changing the city." She shook her head. "Number. The city was ready to change. I just gave it permission." That evening, the family summoned them for another dinner. His mother, sharp-eyed as ever, wasted no time. "You've embarrassed us enough. End this farce before the company dies completely." He opened his mouth, ready to agree, habit, instinct. But then he looked at his wife. She sat tall, gaze steady, not shrinking before the storm. And for the first time, he spoke differently. "No," he said quietly. The table fell silent. His mother's eyes widened. "What did you say?" He straightened, voice firmer now. "I said no. I won't divorce her. Not to save face. Not to save money. Not for anything." His mother slammed her glass down. "She'll ruin us." He looked at his wife, then back at his family. She's the only one keeping us honest." The air grew heavy. No one had ever heard him speak like that before. Back in the car, she turned to him, surprised. "Why did you say that?" He looked at her, jaw tight, heart pounding. "Because it's the truth." For once, she had no reply. She just looked out at the city lights, unsure whether to trust his words. But he knew. Something had shifted. And it was no longer just the city against him. It was his own heart turning toward her, no matter how much he tried to fight it. By the 9th day, the city no longer whispered, it roared. Billboards showed her face instead of his products. Talk shows debated her courage. Hashtags bearing her name trended higher than his company stock. What had begun as a cruel joke was becoming a revolution, and he felt himself trapped between shame and something he couldn't quite name. That morning, he walked into the boardroom, a dozen executives waiting. They didn't stand when he entered. They didn't smile. One cleared his throat. "Your wife is scheduled to speak at the Women's Empowerment Summit this weekend. Do you understand how damaging this is?" He clenched his fists. Damaging to who? The room froze. They had expected excuses, not defiance. He pressed on. "She's not embarrassing the company. She's exposing the truth you're all too afraid to face." The meeting ended in tense silence. For the first time, he defended her not out of obligation, but out of conviction. Meanwhile, she prepared quietly at home, scribbling notes in her worn notebook. She didn't see herself as a leader, but the world had chosen her anyway. When he walked in, she looked up. "You don't have to come." He leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "I'm not letting you face them alone." Her eyes narrowed slightly, wary. "Why? To control the story again?" He shook his head. "Because it stopped being a story. It's your life. And whether you want me there or not, I need to be." Zandon. The night of the summit, the auditorium overflowed. Women of all ages filled the seats, the air buzzing with anticipation. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras trained on the stage. When she stepped out, the applause shook the floor. She wore no diamonds, no flashy gown, just a simple navy dress and the kind of confidence no money could buy. Her speech was raw, unpolished, but powerful. "I was never supposed to be here. I was supposed to be a bet, a joke. But the moment I stood in front of all of you, I realized the only joke is the belief that dignity can be bought and sold." The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Backstage, he stood still, chest tight, watching as his wife, the woman he once mocked, became something larger than either of them. After the summit, they exited through the side door into a swarm of flashing lights. Reporters shouted, fans cheered, security struggled to hold them back. And for once, no one asked about him. They only asked about her. In the car, she sat in silence, exhausted. He broke it gently. "You were incredible." She turned, skeptical. "You don't have to flatter me." He shook his head. "I'm not. I've faced rooms of investors, politicians, kings. None of them made me feel what you did tonight." Her breath caught, but she looked away, unwilling to let her guard down. "Words are easy." He stared at her, voice low. "Then I'll show you." The city lights blurred past the window, neon and gold. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about shareholders, profits, or power. He was thinking about her, the woman who had been forced into his life as a punishment, but who now felt like the only truth he'd ever known. And as he sat in the silence of that car, one thought burned in his chest, unshakable. He hadn't just lost the bet, he had lost his heart. By the 11th day, the city had chosen sides, and the side wasn't his. His skyscraper still stood tall. But the name on top of it no longer inspired pride. It inspired ridicule. The man who bet on a woman's dignity. The story had taken on a life of its own, and no amount of lawyers or spin doctors could tame it. That morning he sat in his office, tie loosened, papers spread across the desk. A headline blinked from the tablet in front of him. The bride who silenced a billionaire. He slammed it shut. The irony was unbearable. The door creaked. She stepped in, holding a folder. Not timid, not apologetic, just steady. "This came for you." He looked up, tense. "What now?" She placed the folder on his desk. "It's an invitation. A televised interview. They want us both." His instinct was to refuse. He had always controlled the narrative, shaped his own image. But lately, no matter what he did, the story slipped further from his grip. "If I go," he muttered, "they'll eat me alive." She tilted her head. "Then maybe it's time you stop pretending you're untouchable." The words lingered like smoke. He didn't answer. He just stared at her, realizing how effortlessly she had become the voice he could no longer silence. That evening, the pressure erupted at a private dinner with his shareholders. The air was heavy with crystal glasses and forced smiles. One investor sneered across the table, "We backed you because you were strong. Now you look weak, chasing after her shadow." The billionaire's hand tightened on his fork. "Her shadow?" he repeated, voice sharp. "She has more light than anyone in this room." Gasps circled the table. The investor smirked. "Careful. People might start believing you actually care for her." Silence. He didn't deny it. Back at the mansion, she confronted him. "Why defend me like that?" He met her eyes, something raw flickering there. "Because you deserve it, and because I'm done letting them define who you are." Her breath caught, but she masked it quickly. "Words are cheap." He stepped closer. "So I'll prove them." The tension was heavy, unspoken, charged. For once, she didn't retreat. But before anything more could be said, the world intruded, her phone buzzed, screen glowing with another headline. She read it aloud, voice steady. "Public demands billionaire apology." He sank onto the sofa, hands over his face. For a man who never bowed, never begged, the idea of apology felt like surrender. But deep down, he knew it was the only way forward. She sat across from him, folding her hands. "They don't want perfection. They want honesty. If you can't give them that, then maybe you really are the man they say you are." Her words cut deep. But instead of anger, he felt something else resolve. For the first time, he considered the unthinkable, admitting he was wrong. That night, as she wrote in her notebook by the window, he watched her in silence. Every stroke of her pen was a reminder she wasn't his punishment. She was his chance. And if he didn't take it soon, he would lose not just the city, he would lose her. By the 12th day, the pressure reached its breaking point. The mansion gates were buried beneath a wave of protesters, cameras flashing day and night. His security staff could barely hold them back. Reporters shouted questions into microphones, demanding answers he refused to give, and every unanswered question only grew the storm. Inside, the billionaire stood in front of the mirror in his dressing room, tie half knotted, eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. For years, he had been the man who never bent, never cracked. Now, cracks ran through everything: his company, his family, his reputation. And worst of all, through the armor he had built around his heart. Behind him, the door opened. She stepped in quietly, wearing a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled into a loose bun. There was nothing glamorous about her that morning. And yet, she carried herself with more authority than the custom suits lining his closet. "You look exhausted," she said softly. He exhaled. "The city wants blood." She studied him, her eyes steady, unyielding. They want truth. They've been fed lies for too long. If you want to end this, give them honesty." He shook his head, jaw tight. "You don't understand. I've built my entire life on power, on never showing weakness." She stepped closer, her voice calm but sharp. "Then maybe weakness is exactly what they need to see, because weakness is human. And right now, you look less like a man and more like a mask. People are done with masks." Her words pierced deeper than any headline. For a moment, he couldn't look at her. He had built skyscrapers, outmaneuvered rivals, controlled empires, but he couldn't control her. And the strangest part was, he didn't want to. That afternoon, they sat together in the study, the invitation to the televised interview lying between them like a loaded gun. He stared at it in silence. Finally he said, "If I go, they'll crucify me." She folded her arms. "Or they'll finally see you, not the billionaire, not the bet, just you." The weight of her gaze pressed down on him, and for the first time, he nodded. then we'll go. R. The studio was packed. Cameras glared. Microphones pointed like arrows, the audience buzzing with anticipation. This wasn't just an interview, it was a trial. And everyone was waiting for his verdict. When they stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in murmurs. He sat stiff in his tailored suit, every inch the billionaire. She sat beside him, calm, composed, her hands folded in her lap. The contrast was striking, his tension against her serenity. The host wasted no time. "Mr. Carter, the entire city believes you married your wife as part of a bet. Is that true?" The question hit like a hammer. The audience leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. His jaw tightened. For a lifetime, he had perfected the art of deflection. But beside him, she sat in silence, waiting. Not for him to save himself, but for him to choose. He opened his mouth, voice heavy. "Yes." The room gasped. Flashes exploded. The host raised an eyebrow. "So you admit it?" He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. For once, he didn't hide. "Yes, I made a bet. I treated her like a prize to be won. And it was the cruelest, most shameful thing I've ever done." Silence. The audience held its breath. He turned to her, his voice breaking. "I humiliated her in front of the world. And yet, instead of destroying me, she stood taller than I ever could. She showed this city what real strength looks like. Not money, not power, but dignity." His confession rippled through the room like thunder. Some gasped, some applauded, some simply sat stunned. The host leaned forward. "And how do you feel now?" He looked directly at her. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. "I thought I won the bet, but I lost. I lost because somewhere along the way I stopped playing, and I started loving her." The crowd erupted. Applause crashed against the walls, some rising to their feet. Cameras flashed faster, capturing every angle of the moment the billionaire broke. She sat still, her eyes glistening but unreadable. Slowly, she turned to him. "Words are easy. Will your actions match them?" The challenge cut through the roar. He nodded, his throat tight. "Then I'll prove it. Not just today, not just on this stage. Every day, for the rest of my life." The host smiled faintly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just witnessed history." IT. The interview replayed on every channel that night. Clips of his confession went viral, stitched into montages with her speeches, her defiance, her dignity. Comment sections flooded with reactions. Some called it redemption. Some doubted his sincerity. But no one ignored it. Back at the mansion, he poured himself a glass of water instead of bourbon. His hands shook, but not from fear, from relief. For once, he wasn't pretending. She stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once mocked her and now seemed to rise with her. He walked over, hesitant. "I meant it," he said quietly. She turned, her eyes softer now but still cautious. "Then prove it. Not to me, to yourself." For the first time, he smiled. Not the polished smile of a billionaire, but the raw, uncertain smile of a man, finally stripped bare. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: the bet was over, and somehow, against every odd, love had begun. By the 13th day, the city was no longer just talking, it was listening. Clips from the interview replayed on every channel. People watched the billionaire confess his bet, watched his voice break as he admitted the truth. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was redemption. But for all, it was unforgettable. At the mansion, the silence was different now. Not the silence of anger, but of something shifting. He stood by the window at dawn, coffee in hand, staring at the horizon. He had confessed, yes. But confessions were only words, and words alone would never be enough. She entered the room, dressed simply, holding her notebook as always. Her voice was calm, but her eyes searched him. "The city heard you, but hearing isn't the same as believing." He nodded slowly. "I know. Belief has to be earned." Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile, almost not. "Then you'll need more than apologies." And, so. Later that day, the couple attended a community event downtown. It wasn't a gala, not a ballroom with crystal chandeliers. It was a food drive for struggling families. Children ran barefoot on cracked sidewalks. Mothers stood in line with weary eyes, and volunteers bustled with crates of bread and canned goods. When the billionaire stepped out of the car, whispers spread. Some glared, some sneered. He was still the man who made a cruel bet, but when she stepped beside him, the atmosphere shifted. People straightened, smiles flickered, hands reached out to shake hers. A reporter shoved a microphone forward. "Mr. Carter, are you here for damage control?" The billionaire froze. Old instincts told him to deflect, to lash out. But then he looked at her. Her steady gaze anchored him, and he said, "Number, I'm here to serve, because I should have been serving all along." With that, he rolled up his sleeves and joined the volunteers. He lifted crates, stacked boxes, handed food to families. The cameras followed every move, recording a billionaire sweating under the sun. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was learning. She worked beside him, tying bags, comforting children, laughing with volunteers. Every so often, he caught her watching him, not with contempt, not with scorn, but with curiosity, as though she, too, was waiting to see if his actions would match his words. That evening, they returned home exhausted, their clothes stained with dust and sweat. For once, the mansion felt less like a cage and more like shelter. He sat heavily on the sofa, rubbing his sore hands. She placed 2 glasses of water on the table and sat across from him. "You surprised me today?" she said quietly. He met her eyes. "I surprised myself." A beat of silence stretched. Then she asked, "Do you regret saying what you did on that stage?" He shook his head. "Number, the only regret I have is waiting so long to say it." Her gaze lingered on him, softer now, the walls between them thinning. The next day, his board staged an emergency meeting. This time, she wasn't invited. Alone in the boardroom, he faced a storm of accusations. "You've embarrassed us. You've destroyed investor confidence. If you don't end this marriage, we'll remove you." For years, fear of losing power would have chained his tongue. But not anymore. He rose from his chair, eyes steady. "Do what you must, but I won't betray her. Not again." Gasps echoed. Threats followed. But he didn't waver. When he returned home, she was waiting in the foyer. She had heard the whispers already. "You stood against them?" "Yes." His voice was firm. "For the first time in my life, I chose what mattered, and it wasn't the company." She stared at him, stunned. For the first time since their wedding, her walls cracked. Her hand lifted slightly, as if to touch his, then fell. "Careful. You're starting to sound like a man I could believe." The air thickened, charged. He stepped closer, voice low. "Then believe me." For a moment, neither moved. The silence between them was louder than any applause. That night, alone in the study, he drafted a letter to the public. Not written by PR teams, not polished by lawyers. His own words. He confessed again, in writing, taking full responsibility. He vowed to fund programs for women's empowerment, scholarships for girls who had been silenced, and campaigns against body shaming. The next morning, the letter was published. It spread across social media, printed on front pages, read aloud on morning shows. And the reaction was different this time. Less fury, more hope. People still doubted, yes, but people also began to wonder, could a man like him change? Back at the mansion, she read the letter quietly, lips moving as her eyes traced each line. When she finished, she looked up at him. "You're risking everything," she said softly. He shook his head. "Number, for the first time, I'm finally gaining something worth losing for." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. She only closed the notebook in her lap, fingers trembling slightly, because for the first time, she wasn't just the woman who had turned the city against him. She was the woman who was beginning to turn his heart towards something he had never known before. Not power, not victory. Love. By the 14th day, the storm had not quieted, it had evolved. The scandal that began as laughter at her expense had transformed into a movement that the city could not ignore. Streets were painted with slogans. Café buzzed with debate. Schools showed clips of her speeches to students. And still, every headline carried her name. The billionaire sat in his office, shoulders heavy, staring at a stack of documents that no longer mattered. Contracts, balance sheets, legal notices, All the emblems of power he once worshipped now felt like relics from another life. He knew it, and more painfully, the board knew it too. That morning, they called another vote of confidence. He walked into the boardroom, jaw tight, every eye drilling into him. His oldest colleague, the same man who had dared him into the marriage, leaned back smugly. "It's simple," the man said. "Choose the company, or choose her. If you don't, we'll cut you out." The billionaire's chest tightened, but his voice came steady. "Then cut me out." The room gasped. The man sneered. "You're throwing away billions." He stood tall, taller than he had in years. "I already threw away my soul once. I won't do it again." He left the boardroom without looking back. The door slammed behind him like the end of an era. I see God. When he returned home, she was waiting on the balcony, her notebook closed on her lap. She looked at him carefully. "You lost something today, didn't you?" He sat across from her, exhaustion lining his face. "Maybe I lost everything, but it feels like the first honest loss I've ever had." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe it's not a loss at all." Oh. They sat in silence, the city glowing beneath them, both knowing that something irreversible had shifted. The following evening, the mayor announced a public forum at City Square, inviting both of them to appear. The crowd would be massive, the broadcast international. For him, it would be the last chance to prove his sincerity. For her, it would be another stage to speak truth. When the night came, the square overflowed. Tens of thousands packed shoulder to shoulder, holding signs, chanting her name. Drones hovered overhead, live streaming to millions. The podium stood tall in the center, lit by blinding spotlights. They walked onto the stage together. He could feel the crowd's hostility aimed at him, sharp as knives. But beside him, she radiated calm, her presence a shield. The host leaned toward the microphone. "Tonight, the city demands answers. Mr. Carter, do you regret the bet that brought us here?" The crowd booed. Reporters raised their cameras. His throat tightened, but this time, he didn't hide. He stepped forward, voice steady, though the weight was crushing. "Yes," he said. "I regret it with every breath I take. I turned a woman's dignity into a game. I treated marriage as a trophy. I humiliated her in front of the world. And I will never stop regretting it." The square roared, some in anger, some in approval. He held up his hand, pressing on. "But regret alone is worthless. So I'm giving up what I once thought mattered most. I've resigned from my own company. Effective today, I no longer lead the empire that was built on pride and cruelty, because I would rather build something smaller, something real, with her." Gasps swept through the crowd. His confession had not been scripted. It was raw, unfiltered, unthinkable. He turned toward her. His voice cracked, but he didn't look away. "I can't undo what I did. But I can promise this. I will spend the rest of my life proving that the man who made that bet is gone. All I ask is the chance to keep standing beside you while I do it." The world seemed to stop. She stared at him, stunned, her heart thundering in her chest. For days, weeks, she had listened to his words, doubted his sincerity, measured his actions. But here he was, stripped of power, stripped of empire, offering her the only thing he had left himself. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some jeering, the noise deafening. But she heard none of it, only him. Slowly she stepped forward, took the microphone, and said, "I don't forgive easily, and I don't forget. But tonight, I see a man who finally understands that dignity cannot be bought. And maybe, just maybe, that's a start." The applause rolled like thunder. He exhaled, relief flooding him, though he knew the road ahead would be long. But for the first time, it was a road he wanted to walk, not alone, not for pride, but with her. Du Revent. Later that night, back at the mansion, the silence was different again. Softer. Warmer. She sat by the window, notebook open, pen hovering. He leaned against the frame, watching her. "What are you writing?" he asked. She glanced at him, a small smile tugging her lips. "The truth. Always the truth." He nodded slowly. "Then write this down too. Tonight was the first night I felt free." "Oh?" She studied him for a moment, then lowered her pen. "Maybe you're finally learning what freedom really means." He smiled faintly, stepping closer. And maybe, freedom means choosing you. Her heart skipped, but she looked back at the city lights instead of his eyes. Still, for the first time, she didn't walk away. And in that fragile silence, something undeniable bloomed. Not the echo of a bet, not the shadow of shame, but the beginning of love. By the 15th day, the story that had started as a cruel bet had stretched itself across the city like a living flame. It no longer belonged to him, not even to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had whispered, everyone who had laughed, everyone who had cried and then realized they were seeing themselves in her strength. The headlines had shifted from mockery to reverence. The bride who defied a bet. The woman who changed a billionaire. Some called her a heroine. Some called him a fraud who was learning too late. But the truth, raw, unpolished, was that their story was not about perfection. It was about the unthinkable. How two broken people could become whole together. That morning, sunlight poured into the mansion, no longer feeling cold or empty. The billionaire, once the master of this house, now a man unmasked, sat quietly at the long dining table. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled up. He didn't look like the photographs in the financial magazines anymore. He looked human. She entered, hair loose around her shoulders, notebook in hand. She sat across from him, pouring herself coffee, her calmness filling the room. "They want us back at City Square tonight," she said, her voice steady. He nodded slowly. "The closing rally." She studied him, searching. "Are you ready?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "I've been ready ever since I stopped pretending I wasn't wrong." Her gaze softened, though her guards still lingered. "Then tonight isn't about words. It's about proving them." ATs. By evening, the square was alive again. Tens of thousands filled the streets, shoulder to shoulder, their voices a chorus of expectation. Candles flickered in the hands of strangers. Banners waved. "Respect is not a bet. Dignity for all." Drones buzzed overhead, broadcasting to millions around the world. She stood backstage, microphone in hand, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of it all. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. She was a vessel for something larger. Beside her, he adjusted his cuff, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in years, the man who once towered over cities felt small before the eyes of his own people. And yet, for the first time, he welcomed that smallness. The host called their names. They stepped onto the stage together. The crowd roared, deafening. She raised her hand, and slowly, the noise fell to silence. Her voice rang clear. 2 weeks ago, I was humiliated before all of you. I was turned into a joke, a spectacle, a bet. I was told that my worth was a game to be played, a prize to be won. But I refused to vanish. I refused to shrink. The crowd erupted in cheers. She waited, then lifted her chin. And look at us now. Look at what we've built together in only days. A city that is louder than cruelty. A city that is braver than shame. A city that knows dignity doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to everyone. Applause thundered, people rising to their feet, tears shining in their eyes. And then, without warning, she turned to him. The spotlight followed her gaze. You all wanted answers from him. So tonight, he will give them. Every camera swung to him. His throat tightened. For years, he had controlled the narrative. Now he stood before it naked. He stepped forward, gripping the microphone. His voice cracked. But he didn't hide. Yes, he said. I made a bet. I humiliated her. I mocked the very idea of love. And for that, I deserve every ounce of your anger. The crowd buzzed, restless. But she refused to be crushed. She stood in front of all of you and turned my shame into her fire. She showed me, and this city, that strength isn't in money or power. It's in dignity. It's in courage. It's in standing tall when the world tells you to bow. Gasps rippled through the audience. He pressed on. I've stepped down from the company I once worshipped. I've lost the empire I thought defined me. But tonight, I tell you the truth, losing those things is nothing compared to what I almost lost before I ever understood her worth. I don't want redemption from you. I want love from her. He turned, facing her fully now. His voice broke. I love you, not as apology, not as performance. I love you because you are everything I never was brave enough to be. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it whether you accept me or not." The crowd exploded, half in cheers, half in stunned silence. Cameras flashed, recording every second. She stood still, her heart pounding. For days, she had doubted. For nights, she had guarded herself. And yet, as she looked at him now, not the billionaire, not the man who made a bet, but the man who had stripped himself bare before an entire city, something inside her shifted. Slowly, she stepped forward, took the microphone, and said, "I don't forgive easily, and I don't forget. But love isn't about erasing scars. It's about choosing someone despite them." She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "So tonight, I choose you." The square erupted. Strangers wept. Couples held each other tighter. Children clapped in the arms of their parents. The cameras caught the moment the city had been waiting for, the moment the woman who had been mocked on her wedding day chose, on her own terms, to love the man who had wronged her. He stepped to her, trembling, pulling her into his arms. And there, beneath the floodlights, under the roar of a city that had once turned against them, they kissed. Not as a performance, not as a contract, but as two people who had clawed their way through fire and found each other on the other side. Tito. That night, back at the mansion, the gates were no longer guarded by protesters. Instead, flowers lined the iron bars. Candles flickered in the night. Notes of gratitude fluttered in the breeze. "Thank you for teaching us courage. Respect is not a bet. You gave us hope." Inside, she sat at her desk, notebook open. He entered quietly, standing in the doorway, watching her write. "What are you writing?" he asked, his voice gentle. She looked up, a small smile tugging her lips. "The ending." He stepped closer. "And how does it end?" She closed the notebook, laying her pen across it. "It doesn't. Tonight wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of something honest." He reached for her hand, and this time, she let him. Together, they stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once mocked her, once mocked him, now glowing with candles and hope. For years, he had believed the city belonged to him. Tonight, he knew better. The city belonged to her. And now, with her hand in his, perhaps it belonged to them both. Their story had started as a bet, a cruel, careless game. But it ended here with redemption, with dignity, with love. Love that was bruised. Love that was imperfect. Love that was earned. And as the night deepened, as the city hummed with new beginnings, one truth closed the circle. Even the ugliest of beginnings can lead to the most beautiful of endings. And so their story didn't close with shame, or cruelty, or laughter. It closed with a promise. The end of the bet. The beginning of forever.